Lila Harper lived a life that many would call difficult. Every morning she woke up to the sound of cars honking on the busy street outside her tiny apartment. The walls were thin, and the paint was peeling. But it was home. Or at least, it was as close to a home as she could afford. Her days started early and ended late, filled with work at a small diner in downtown Chicago. She served coffee to tired office workers, flipped pancakes for families, and cleaned tables until her hands felt raw. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, or most of them anyway. Her mother, Evelyn, lived with her. Evelyn had been sick for years, her body weakened by an illness that drained both their savings and hope. Lila did everything she could to keep her spirits up, even though she often felt like giving up herself. But there was one thing that kept her going: music. Music had always been Lila's escape, her way of stepping out of the chaos of her life and into something beautiful. When Lila was just a child, her grandmother had given her an old piano. It wasn't fancy or expensive. It was missing a few keys and some of the notes sounded slightly off. But it was hers. For hours every day she would sit at that piano, teaching herself how to play. At first it was just simple songs she heard on the radio. Over time, though, she began experimenting. She played melodies she made up in her head, blending bits of classical pieces with her own ideas. The piano became her best friend, her confidant, and her teacher. As Lila grew older, life got harder. After her grandmother passed away, the family sold the old piano to pay for medical bills. Lila missed it terribly, but she couldn't dwell on what she didn't have. Instead, she focused on surviving. She worked odd jobs, took care of her mother, and tried to stay positive. Still, whenever she walked past a piano, whether it was in a store window or at a neighbor's house, she couldn't help but stop and stare. Sometimes, if no one was looking, she'd press a key or two, just to feel the vibrations beneath her fingers. One chilly evening, after finishing her shift at the diner, Lila overheard a conversation between two customers. They were talking about a charity event happening downtown. "It's supposed to be big," one of them said. "Lots of rich people showing up to donate money. There'll be food, music, art displays, you name it." Lila listened carefully, thinking about how much they were describing sounded like a world completely different from hers. Rich people wearing suits and dresses, sipping champagne while admiring paintings. It seemed so far removed from her reality. But then, another thought crossed her mind. Maybe she could go. Not to enjoy herself, but to see if there might be any opportunities. Perhaps someone there needed extra help setting up tables or cleaning up afterward. Even a few extra dollars would make a difference right now. The idea stuck with her, and before she knew it, Lila found herself standing outside the hotel where the event was being held. She smoothed down her worn jacket and adjusted the scarf around her neck, trying to look presentable. Inside, the room glittered with lights and laughter. People dressed in elegant outfits moved gracefully from one display to another, chatting and smiling. Lila felt out of place immediately. Her clothes were plain, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, and her hands still smelled faintly of dish soap despite her efforts to wash them thoroughly. She wandered through the crowd, searching for someone who looked like they might be in charge. Eventually, she spotted a man standing near a table covered in brochures. He wore a suit and had a clipboard in his hand. Taking a deep breath, Lila approached him. "Excuse me," she said softly. "I was wondering if there's any work available here tonight?" The man glanced at her, taking in her appearance. His name tag read Daniel Brooks. Without hesitation, he smirked and replied, "Work? Well, we do have a broken piano sitting in the corner. Why don't you give that a try? Seems about your speed." His words stung, but Lila forced herself not to react. She knew what he meant, that she didn't belong here, that she wasn't good enough for this world of wealth and glamour. But instead of walking away, she surprised herself by nodding. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll play it." A ripple of laughter spread through the nearby guests, and Lila felt her face grow hot. She should have left. She should have turned around and walked out of that room, never looking back. But something inside her refused to let this moment define her. If anything, it fueled her determination. She walked toward the broken piano in the corner, ignoring the whispers and snickers following her every step. The piano was worse than she expected. Its surface was scratched, its legs wobbled slightly, and several keys were either missing or stuck. To anyone else, it might have seemed useless. But to Lila, it was familiar. In a strange way, it reminded her of the old piano her grandmother had given her all those years ago. Sitting down on the bench, she placed her hands gently on the keys. The room quieted momentarily, curiosity replacing mockery. No one expected much. After all, how could someone like her produce anything worth listening to? But then, Lila began to play. Lila's fingers hovered over the keys for a brief moment before they began to move. At first, the notes were hesitant, almost as if she were testing the limits of the damaged instrument. But then something shifted. Her hands seemed to find their rhythm, dancing across the keys with a confidence that no one in the room had anticipated. The broken piano groaned and creaked under her touch, but Lila didn't let its flaws stop her. Instead, she worked around them, weaving together melodies that felt both haunting and beautiful. The audience, which had been chatting and laughing moments earlier, grew quiet. People turned their heads toward the corner where Lila sat, their expressions shifting from skepticism to astonishment. Even Daniel Brooks, who had made the cruel joke about the piano, found himself staring. His clipboard hung forgotten at his side as he watched Lila play. She wasn't just pressing random keys, she was creating something magical. The music filled the room, wrapping around everyone like a warm blanket on a cold night. What made Lila's performance even more remarkable was how she adapted to the piano's limitations. When a key stuck, she skipped it entirely, filling the gap with another note that somehow fit perfectly. When a chord sounded flat or uneven, she adjusted her rhythm to compensate. It was as though the broken piano had become an extension of herself, bending to her will and bringing her vision to life. No one could believe what they were hearing or seeing. Grace Miller stood near the back of the room, sipping champagne and observing the crowd. Grace was a well-known figure in the music industry, a producer who had worked with some of the biggest names in the business. She hadn't planned to attend this charity event, but a friend had convinced her to come along. Now, she was glad. She had. Something about Lila's playing caught her attention immediately. There was raw emotion in every note, a depth that couldn't be faked or taught. Grace pushed her way through the growing crowd, eager to get a closer look. As she approached, she noticed tears streaming down Lila's face. They weren't tears of sadness, though, at least not entirely. They were tears of release, as if Lila had been holding all of her pain, frustration, and hope inside for years, and now it was pouring out through her fingertips. Grace felt a lump rise in her own throat. She had seen talented musicians before, but none quite like this. When Lila finally reached the end of her piece, she paused, letting the last note hang in the air. For a moment, there was complete silence. Then someone started clapping. Slowly, others joined in until the entire room erupted into applause. People cheered and whistled, calling out words of praise. Lila blinked, startled by the reaction. She hadn't expected anyone to care, let alone applaud. Her cheeks flushed red as she stood up, unsure of what to do next. Grace wasted no time stepping forward. "That was incredible," she said, extending a hand. "My name is Grace Miller. I'm a music producer." Lila hesitated, glancing at Grace's outstretched hand before shaking it awkwardly. "Thank you," she murmured, still overwhelmed by the sudden attention. "I'm Lila Harper." "I've never heard anything like that before," Grace continued, her voice full of genuine admiration. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Lila hesitated again, unsure of how to explain her story. I taught myself," she admitted. "It's something I've done since I was a kid." Grace nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, Lila, I'd love to talk to you more about your music. Do you have any other pieces? Or maybe some original compositions?" Lila shook her head quickly. "No, nothing written down. I just play what comes to me." "That's even better," Grace replied with a smile. "Look, I know this might sound crazy, but I think you have something special, something people need to hear. Would you be interested in working together? Maybe recording an album? For a moment, Lila thought she must have misunderstood. Recording an album. That was something famous musicians did, not someone like her. I don't know, she stammered. I mean, I work at a diner and I take care of my mom. I don't think I could. Grace cut her off gently. Listen, I get it. Life isn't easy. But trust me when I say this. Your talent deserves to be shared with the world. Let me help you make that happen. Lila looked around the room, taking in the faces of the people who had once laughed at her. Now they were smiling, nodding, and whispering to each other about how amazing she was. It was surreal, like stepping into a dream. Finally, she turned back to Grace and nodded slowly. Okay, she said softly. Let's try. Over the next few weeks, Lila's life changed in ways she never imagined. Grace arranged for her to practice in a professional studio, where she had access to real pianos and equipment. At first, Lila felt intimidated by the sleek instruments and high-tech gadgets, but Grace encouraged her to stay true to herself. Don't worry about perfection, she told her. Just play what feels right. During these sessions, Lila poured her heart into every song. Some pieces were inspired by memories of her grandmother, while others reflected her struggles and dreams. She wrote about late nights at the diner, about watching her mother struggle with illness, and about the tiny moments of joy she found in everyday life. Each note carried a piece of her soul, and Grace knew they would resonate with listeners. Meanwhile, word of Lila's story began to spread. Someone recorded part of her performance at the charity event and posted it online. Within days, the video went viral. Comments poured in from people all over the country, praising her talent and sharing their own stories of overcoming adversity. Journalists reached out, asking for interviews. Radio stations played snippets of her music. Suddenly, Lila wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a symbol of hope. Despite the growing attention, Lila remained humble. She continued working at the diner, afraid to give up the stability it provided. But Grace assured her that things were about to change. You're going to be okay, she said during one of their meetings. This is your chance to create a new life, for you and your mom. As the months passed, Lila began to believe it. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to dream of a future where she didn't have to worry about money or medical bills. A future where she could focus on doing what she loved most, making music. And though she knew challenges lay ahead, she faced them with a newfound confidence. After all, if she could turn a broken piano into a masterpiece, what else might she accomplish? Lila's journey into the world of music was not without its difficulties. Even with Grace by her side, guiding her through every step, Lila often felt like she was walking on shaky ground. The studio was a completely new environment for her, filled with equipment she didn't understand, and people who spoke in terms she had never heard before. At first she worried she wouldn't fit in, that she'd somehow disappoint everyone who believed in her. But Grace reminded her time and again that talent wasn't about fancy gear or technical language. It was about emotion, honesty, and connection. Every day after her shift at the diner, Lila would head straight to the studio. She brought her mother Evelyn along sometimes, letting her sit in a quiet corner where she could rest while Lila worked. Evelyn, though weak and tired, always smiled when she heard her daughter play. You were born for this, she whispered one evening as they walked home together. Lila smiled back but didn't respond. Deep down, she still struggled to believe it. Recording an album was harder than Lila had imagined. It wasn't just about playing the piano. It was about capturing the essence of each song, making sure every note sounded exactly right. Sometimes Lila would spend hours perfecting a single melody, only to start over because something didn't feel quite right. Grace encouraged her to trust her instincts. Don't think too much, she said. Just let your heart guide you. Slowly, Lila began to relax. She realized that perfection wasn't the goal. Authenticity was. The songs she created weren't polished or flawless, but they were real. They told her story, raw and unfiltered, and that was what made them powerful. One track, titled Broken Keys, became the centerpiece of the album. It was inspired by the night at the charity event, the moment when she turned a cruel joke into something beautiful. Every time she played it, she thought about how far she had come and how much farther she still wanted to go. As the album took shape, word of Lila's story continued to spread. News outlets picked up on her rise from poverty to potential stardom, painting her as a symbol of resilience. Local newspapers ran articles about her, and morning talk shows invited her to share her experience. At first, Lila hesitated. She wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the thought of speaking in front of cameras made her nervous, but Grace reassured her. "People aren't just interested in your music," she said. "They're inspired by your courage. Share your truth, and they'll connect with you." The first interview was the hardest. Lila sat across from a cheerful host on a brightly lit set, clutching a glass of water to steady her hands. Questions came quickly. How did she learn to play? What kept her going during tough times? Did she ever imagine she'd end up here? Lila answered honestly, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger as she spoke. By the end of the segment, tears glistened in her eyes, not from sadness but from relief. For so long she had kept her struggles hidden, afraid of judgment or pity. Now she realized that sharing her story could inspire others. The response was overwhelming. Viewers flooded social media with messages of support, many saying they saw themselves in Lila's journey. Some shared their own battles with hardship, thanking her for reminding them that hope existed even in the darkest moments. Others praised her determination, calling her a role model. Lila read every comment, feeling a mix of gratitude and disbelief. She wasn't just a waitress anymore, or even just a musician. She was proof that life could change in unexpected ways, but fame brought challenges too. As Lila's name grew more recognizable, so did the scrutiny. Critics emerged, questioning whether her success was genuine or simply a result of her viral video. A few snarky bloggers dismissed her as a one-hit wonder, predicting her career would fade as quickly as it had risen. Lila tried not to let the negativity affect her, but some days it was hard. Grace noticed and pulled her aside one afternoon. "Ignore them," she said firmly. "Focus on why you started this in the first place. You're doing this for yourself and for everyone who needs to hear your music." Grace's words stuck with Lila. She reminded herself that she hadn't embarked on this journey for fame or money. She had done it because music was her passion, her lifeline. And if her songs could bring comfort or inspiration to even one person, then all the effort was worth it. Amid the whirlwind of recording sessions, interviews, and public appearances, Lila found moments of peace. Late at night, when the city outside her window fell silent, she would sit at the piano in the studio and play whatever came to mind. These private sessions were her favorite part of the process. Without the pressure of perfection or an audience, she could simply be herself. Sometimes Grace joined her, sitting quietly as Lila experimented with new melodies. Other times Lila played alone, letting her thoughts flow freely into the music. One evening, as she worked on a particularly emotional piece, Grace leaned over and said, "This is it. This is the song that will define your album." Lila stopped playing and looked at her, confused. "What do you mean?" Grace smiled. "It's the one that says everything you've been through, the pain, the struggle, the triumph. It's honest, raw, and unforgettable. Trust me, people are going to love it." Lila nodded slowly, though she still doubted herself. Could her music really resonate with others? Would they see the same beauty in her imperfections that she did? Only time would tell. Finally, after months of hard work, the album was ready. Titled Broken Keys, it featured 10 tracks, each one telling a chapter of Lila's life. From the haunting opening notes of the title track to the hopeful crescendo of the final song, the album was a testament to her resilience and creativity. Grace organized a small listening party to celebrate its completion, inviting close friends, family, and a few industry professionals. Lila felt nervous as she stood in the corner of the room watching guests react to her music. To her surprise, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive. People approached her afterward, shaking her hand and congratulating her. One woman hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Your music saved me," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone understood what I was going through until I heard your songs." That moment stayed with Lila long after the party ended. For the first time, she truly understood the impact her music could have. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who listened, everyone who found solace in her melodies. And as she prepared for the official release of Broken Keys, she vowed to keep sharing her truth no matter what challenges lay ahead. Her journey was far from over, but Lila knew one thing for certain. She had already achieved something extraordinary. She had taken a broken piano and turned it into a masterpiece, a reminder that even the most damaged things could create something beautiful. The day Broken Keys was officially released felt like a blur to Lila. She woke up early, her heart racing with excitement and nerves. The album cover, a simple black and white photo of her sitting at an old piano, stared back at her from her phone screen. It wasn't glamorous or flashy, it was honest, just like the music inside. Grace had told her that authenticity would resonate with people, but Lila still wondered if anyone would truly listen. By mid-morning, the numbers started coming in. Streams on music platforms climbed faster than anyone expected. Social media lit up with posts from listeners sharing their favorite tracks and stories about how the songs moved them. One fan tweeted, "I've been battling depression for years, and tonight I cried listening to Broken Keys. Thank you, Lila Harper, for reminding me I'm not alone." Another wrote, "This is the kind of music that heals your soul. Please, don't ever stop making art like this." Lila read each message, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her phone. She had never imagined her music could mean so much to others. Growing up, she always thought of herself as ordinary, someone who blended into the background. But now people were seeing her, hearing her, and finding pieces of themselves in her songs. It was overwhelming, but in the best possible way. Grace called her later that afternoon, her voice brimming with excitement. "We're trending," she said. "Not just locally, nationwide. Radio stations are already requesting interviews, and streaming services are adding your songs to playlists. This is huge, Lila, you did it." Lila didn't know what to say. She sat on the edge of her bed staring at the cracked wallpaper in her apartment. Did she really do it? Or was this all just a fleeting moment, a stroke of luck that would fade as quickly as it came? Part of her wanted to hold on to that doubt. It felt safer somehow, but another part of her dared to believe. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something real. As the days turned into weeks, Lila's life transformed in ways she couldn't have predicted. She quit her job at the diner, using the money from album sales and streaming royalties to pay off debts and cover her mother's medical expenses. For the first time in years, she didn't have to worry about whether they'd be able to afford rent or groceries. Evelyn, though still frail, seemed happier too. Watching her daughter succeed filled her with pride, even if she couldn't fully grasp the magnitude of it all. But success wasn't without its challenges. Fame brought attention, not all of it positive. Some critics dismissed Lila as a novelty act, claiming her story overshadowed her actual talent. Others questioned whether she deserved the praise she was receiving, suggesting she had gotten lucky rather than earned her place in the spotlight. Reading these comments stung, especially when they came from people she respected in the industry. Still, Lila reminded herself of Grace's advice: focus on why she started. One afternoon, while rehearsing for an upcoming performance, Lila received a call from a local charity organization. They asked if she would be willing to speak at their annual fundraiser, sharing her story and performing a few songs. At first, she hesitated. Public speaking still made her nervous, and the idea of standing in front of hundreds of strangers intimidated her. But then she thought about the message she wanted to send, the same message she had clung to during her darkest days. No matter how broken you feel, there's always hope. She agreed to the event, spending hours preparing her speech. When the night arrived, she stood backstage, clutching a glass of water and trying to calm her racing heart. Grace stood beside her, offering quiet encouragement. "You've got this," she whispered. "Just be yourself." When Lila stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. Spotlights illuminated her as she walked to the microphone, her footsteps echoing softly against the polished floor. She took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "I grew up thinking I wasn't good enough," she said, looking out at the sea of faces. "I worked long hours at a diner, cared for my sick mom, and struggled to make ends meet. Music was my escape, but I never dreamed anyone would care about what I created. Then one night someone told me to play a broken piano as a joke. I could have walked away, I almost did. But instead I played. And that decision changed everything." The audience listened intently, hanging on every word. Lila paused, letting the weight of her story sink in before continuing. Life doesn't always give us perfect instruments or ideal circumstances. Sometimes we're handed broken pieces and told to make do. But here's the thing. Broken doesn't mean worthless. Broken can still create beauty. That's what I want you to remember tonight. No matter where you come from or what challenges you face, you have the power to turn your pain into something meaningful. When she finished speaking, the room erupted into applause. Tears welled in Lila's eyes as she moved to the piano set up on stage. She played 3 songs, each one earning a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached her, thanking her for her words and her music. One woman hugged her tightly, saying, "You saved my life tonight. I didn't think I had anything left to give, but your story reminded me that I do." Moments like these kept Lila grounded. No matter how busy her schedule became or how many accolades she received, she never forgot why she started. Her music wasn't about fame or fortune, it was about connection. Every note she played carried a piece of her soul, and every listener who found comfort in it validated her journey. With Grace's guidance, Lila began planning a small tour to promote Broken Keys. She performed in intimate venues across the country, choosing spaces that felt personal and inviting. Each show was different, shaped by the energy of the crowd and the stories they shared with her afterward. Some nights she stayed late signing autographs and talking to fans. Other nights she retreated to her hotel room, exhausted but fulfilled. One evening, after a particularly emotional performance, a man approached her with tears in his eyes. "My daughter passed away last year," he said, his voice breaking. "Your song Fragments, it sounds like her, like the love I'll always carry for her. Thank you for helping me grieve." Lila didn't know what to say. She simply hugged him, feeling the weight of his loss and the unexpected role her music had played in his healing process. These encounters reminded her of the responsibility she carried as an artist. Her songs weren't just entertainment, they were lifelines for some, bridges between pain and hope. As the tour wrapped up, Lila returned home to Chicago, exhausted but grateful. Her life had changed dramatically in such a short time. Yet some things remained the same. She still visited her mother daily, cooking meals and tidying their apartment. She still walked past the diner where she used to work, exchanging smiles with former co-workers who cheered her on. And she still played the piano whenever she needed to clear her mind, letting the music guide her through whatever emotions bubbled beneath the surface. Looking ahead, Lila knew there would be more challenges. The music industry was unpredictable, and maintaining success required constant effort. But for now, she allowed herself to bask in the joy of what she had accomplished. She had taken a broken piano, a symbol of ridicule, and turned it into a masterpiece. More importantly, she had shown the world that even the most damaged things could create something beautiful. And as she sat at her grandmother's old piano, the one Grace had tracked down and restored as a surprise gift, Lila smiled. This instrument, once forgotten and neglected, now stood proudly in her living room, a reminder of where she came from and how far she had come. Her fingers danced across the keys, filling the room with a melody that spoke of resilience, gratitude, and endless possibility. Months after the release of Broken Keys, Lila Harper found herself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting the collar of a dress she had borrowed from Grace. Tonight was different. It wasn't just another performance or interview. This time, she was attending a gala as the guest of honor, an event celebrating emerging artists and their contributions to the community. The irony wasn't lost on her. Just a year ago, she had walked into a similar room feeling invisible, dismissed as someone who didn't belong. Now people were lining up to meet her, eager to hear her story and learn from her journey. As she entered the grand ballroom, cameras flashed and a sea of faces turned toward her. Reporters shouted questions, asking about her plans for the future and how it felt to be recognized. Lila smiled politely but kept moving, focusing on finding Grace in the crowd. When she finally spotted her, Grace waved her over, introducing her to a group of influential figures in the arts community. Lila listened intently as they praised her work, calling her a beacon of hope and an inspiration to aspiring musicians everywhere. Despite the compliments, Lila couldn't shake the image of Daniel Brooks somewhere in the room. She hadn't seen him yet, but she knew he was there. He had been invited as part of the organizing committee. The thought made her stomach churn. Would he approach her, apologize for his cruel joke that night, or would he avoid her altogether, pretending nothing had happened? Either way, Lila told herself it didn't matter. His words no longer held power over her. If anything, they had pushed her to prove him wrong. The evening continued with speeches, awards, and performances. When it was Lila's turn to take the stage, the room fell silent. She stepped up to the microphone, her heart pounding but her mind clear. For weeks she had rehearsed what she wanted to say, careful to strike the right balance between gratitude and honesty. She began by thanking Grace, her mother Evelyn, and everyone who had supported her along the way. Then she paused, looking out at the audience. "I want to talk about something that happened not too long ago," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the moment. "A man once told me to play a broken piano because he thought it matched my life. He meant it as a joke, to humiliate me in front of others, and maybe at the time I deserved to feel small. After all, I was struggling, working long hours at a diner while caring for my sick mom. Life wasn't easy, and sometimes it felt like the world was against me." She glanced toward the back of the room, spotting Daniel sitting stiffly in his seat. His face was pale, and his eyes avoided hers. Lila took a deep breath before continuing. "But here's the thing. That broken piano became my turning point. It reminded me that even when life feels damaged or unfair, we have the power to create something beautiful. That night I chose not to walk away. Instead I played, and because of that choice everything changed." The room erupted into applause, but Lila wasn't finished. "I'm not sharing this story to shame anyone," she added softly. "I'm sharing it because I want you to remember that words matter. Actions matter. We never know how our behavior might affect someone else. So tonight I dedicate this award and my entire journey to anyone who has ever been underestimated or told they weren't good enough. Keep going. Keep fighting. Because your story isn't over yet." When she stepped off the stage, tears streaming down her face, the audience gave her a standing ovation. People rushed forward to congratulate her, many expressing how moved they were by her speech. Even Daniel approached her tentatively, extending a hand. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What I said that night, it was wrong. I can't imagine what you must have felt." Lila looked at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded and shook his hand. "Thank you," she replied simply. There was no anger. In her voice, only understanding. Holding on to bitterness wouldn't change the past, and she had already forgiven him long ago, though he didn't need to know that. In the months that followed, Lila used her platform to give back to the community. She partnered with local charities to provide music lessons to underprivileged children, ensuring they had access to instruments and resources. She also launched a scholarship fund in her grandmother's name, supporting young artists who lacked financial means but possessed immense talent. Every time she visited a classroom or attended a fundraising event, she shared her story, emphasizing the importance of resilience and self-belief. Her efforts didn't go unnoticed. Magazines featured her as one of the most inspiring figures of the year, praising not only her musical achievements but also her commitment to helping others. Invitations poured in from schools, community centers, and conferences, each requesting her presence as a speaker or performer. Though her schedule grew busier, Lila remained grounded, prioritizing her family and staying true to her values. One day, while visiting her mother at home, Lila noticed a flyer taped to the refrigerator. It advertised a benefit concert organized by one of the charities she supported. The headline read, "From Broken Keys to Beautiful Melodies, a tribute to overcoming adversity." Beneath it was a photo of Lila playing the piano, her hands suspended above the keys in mid-motion. Evelyn pointed to it proudly. "Look at you," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You've come so far, sweetheart. Your grandma would be so proud." Lila smiled, pulling her mother into a hug. She didn't respond, not because she disagreed, but because she didn't need to. Deep down, she knew her grandmother was watching, smiling alongside them. The memories of those early days, teaching herself to play on a worn-out instrument, felt like a lifetime ago. Yet they shaped who she was today, a woman who refused to let circumstances define her. Later that week, Lila returned to the studio to begin work on her second album. Unlike the first, which had been deeply personal, this project focused on collaboration. She invited other musicians to join her, blending different styles and voices to create something unique. Grace encouraged her to experiment, reminding her that growth came from stepping outside her comfort zone. Together they explored new sounds, incorporating elements of jazz, blues, and classical music into the mix. Recording sessions became a source of joy for Lila. She loved hearing how each artist brought their own perspective to the table, enriching the songs with layers of meaning. One track, titled "Rising Tide," stood out as particularly special. It combined Lila's signature piano melodies with soulful vocals and a haunting violin solo. Grace called it a masterpiece, predicting it would resonate with listeners worldwide. While working on the album, Lila received an unexpected invitation. A prestigious university in New York asked her to deliver a keynote address during their annual arts symposium. The topic, turning pain into purpose. At first, she hesitated, unsure if she was qualified to speak to such a distinguished audience, but Grace convinced her otherwise. "You're living proof of that title," she said. "Who better to inspire these students than someone who has lived it?" On the day of the symposium, Lila stood backstage, clutching a notebook filled with notes for her speech. Students filled the auditorium, their faces eager and curious. As she walked onto the stage, the room erupted into applause. Taking a deep breath, she began to speak, weaving together stories from her childhood, her struggles as a young adult, and the moments that led to her breakthrough. "When I started playing the piano, it wasn't about fame or success," she explained. "It was about survival. Music gave me a voice when I felt voiceless, a way to process emotions I couldn't put into words. And even though life threw challenges my way, I held on to that love, for music, for creativity, for expression. That's what kept me going." She paused, scanning the room. "If there's one thing I want you to take away from today, it's this. Don't wait for perfect conditions to chase your dreams. Start where you are, with what you have. Use your pain as fuel, your struggles as motivation. Because every note you play, every brushstroke you paint, every word you write, it matters. You matter." When she finished speaking, the audience rose to their feet, cheering loudly. Students lined up afterward to ask questions, share their own experiences, and thank her for her words. One young woman approached her, tears streaming down her face. "I almost gave up on my art," she admitted. "But listening to you tonight, it reminded me why I started. Thank you for being brave enough to share your story." Lila hugged her tightly, feeling a surge of emotion. These interactions, the connections forged through vulnerability and authenticity, were what made her journey worthwhile. Fame and accolades were fleeting, but the impact of her music and message could last a lifetime. As she boarded the plane back to Chicago later that evening, Lila reflected on how much her life had changed. From serving coffee at a diner to performing on stages across the country, she had defied expectations, including her own. But more importantly, she had stayed true to herself, using her talents to uplift others and remind them of their worth. Looking out the window as the plane ascended into the clouds, Lila allowed herself a moment of quiet pride. She had taken a broken piano and turned it into a symphony, and now she was doing the same with her life, piecing together fragments of pain, hope, and resilience to create something extraordinary. Layla Harper's second album, Rising Tide, was released on a crisp autumn morning. The title track, with its soaring melodies and layered harmonies, became an instant hit. Critics praised it as a bold step forward, proof that Lila wasn't content to rest on her laurels. Fans embraced the new sound, calling it both familiar and fresh, a reflection of Lila's growth as an artist and a person. But for Lila, the success of the album meant more than just another milestone in her career. It represented something deeper, her ability to evolve while staying true to who she was. The months leading up to the release had been busy ones. In addition to recording sessions, Lila traveled across the country, performing at festivals, charity events, and schools. Everywhere she went, people greeted her warmly, eager to share how her music had touched their lives. She met teenagers, struggling with self-doubt, parents juggling multiple jobs to support their families, and seniors rediscovering their love for music after years of silence. Each encounter reminded her why she started this journey in the first place, not for fame or fortune, but to connect with others and remind them they weren't alone. One evening, after a concert in a small town in Ohio, a young boy approached her backstage. He couldn't have been older than 10, clutching a worn notebook filled with scribbled lyrics and chord progressions. "I want to be like you when I grow up," he said shyly, his eyes wide with admiration. Lila knelt down to her, meet him at eye level, smiling gently. "You don't have to wait until you're grown up to start," she told him. "Keep writing, keep playing. Even if it feels hard sometimes, don't stop." She handed him one of her guitar picks as a keepsake, watching as his face lit up with excitement. Moments like these stayed with her long after the crowds dispersed and the lights dimmed. They reminded her that her influence extended beyond the notes she played. It was about inspiring others to believe in themselves, just as she had learned to do. Back home in Chicago, life began to settle into a rhythm. Evelyn's health improved slightly, thanks to better medical care funded by Lila's earnings. Though she still required constant attention, there were days when she could sit by the window, knitting or reading, her spirits lifted by the knowledge that her daughter's hard work had paid off. On weekends, Lila often invited Grace over for dinner, the three of them laughing and sharing stories late into the night. For the first time in years, Lila felt a sense of stability, a foundation upon which she could build her future. But even as her personal life stabilized, Lila remained committed to giving back. She expanded her scholarship fund, partnering with music schools to provide instruments and lessons to underserved communities. She also launched a mentorship program, connecting aspiring artists with professionals in the industry. Her goal was simple: to create opportunities for those who might not otherwise have access to them. At one such event, held in a community center on the south side of Chicago, Lila addressed a group of high school students. "When I was your age, I didn't think anyone cared about what I had to say," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "I thought my dreams were too big, my circumstances too difficult. But here's the truth. No matter where you come from, your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her words resonated deeply with the audience. Afterward, several students lingered, asking questions and seeking advice. One girl, a pianist named Maya, caught Lila's attention. Her fingers moved effortlessly across the keys during a short performance, her talent undeniable. When Lila complimented her, Maya blushed, confessing that she dreamed of attending a prestigious conservatory, but feared rejection. "What if I'm not good enough?" she asked quietly. Lila placed a hand on her shoulder. "Good enough doesn't exist," she replied. "All that matters is whether you love what you're doing. If you do, nothing can stop you." Maya nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. Weeks later, Lila received a letter from her, thanking her for the encouragement and announcing that she had auditioned and been accepted to the conservatory of her dreams. Reading the note, Lila felt a surge of pride. This was why she kept pushing forward, to show others that anything was possible if they dared to try. As the year drew to a close, Lila found herself reflecting on how far she had come. From the dingy diner where she once served coffee to sold-out venues where thousands cheered her name, her journey had been nothing short of extraordinary. Yet she knew there was still work to be done. Fame hadn't changed her core values. It had only amplified her desire to make a difference. On New Year's Eve, Lila attended a gala hosted by a national arts organization. As she mingled with guests, she noticed a familiar face across the room. It was Daniel Brooks, the man who had mocked her at the charity event years earlier. He looked older now, his hair grayer, his expression guarded. When their eyes met, he hesitated before approaching her. "I wasn't sure you'd remember me," he said awkwardly, extending a hand. "But I wanted to say, I followed your career. You've done incredible things." Lila shook his hand, her grip firm but kind. "Thank you," she replied simply. There was no bitterness in her tone, only understanding. She knew that holding on to anger wouldn't change the past, and she had already forgiven him long ago. Instead, she chose to focus on the present, the lives she had touched, the barriers she had broken, and the legacy she hoped to leave behind. Later that night, as fireworks exploded overhead, Lila stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Grace joined her, wrapping a scarf around her shoulders against the cold. "What are you thinking about?" Grace asked, following her gaze toward the skyline. Lila smiled, her breath visible in the frosty air. "How much has changed," she said softly. "And how much hasn't? People are still struggling. Life is still unpredictable, but maybe we can help each other through it. Maybe that's what matters most." Grace nodded, squeezing her arm affectionately. "You've already done so much, Lila, more than most people ever will." Lila shook her head, modest as always. "It's not about me. It's about all of us. Every person who listens to my music, every student I mentor, every fan who writes to me, they're part of this story too. Together, we're creating something bigger than any one of us." As the clock struck midnight, signaling the start of a new year, Lila closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She thought about the broken piano that had sparked her journey, the laughter that had once stung but ultimately fueled her determination. She thought about her mother, her grandmother, Grace, and everyone who had believed in her along the way. And she thought about the countless strangers whose lives she had yet to touch. When she opened her eyes again, the world seemed brighter somehow, full of possibility and promise. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Because she had learned that brokenness wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It was the raw material from which beauty emerged, the starting point for something greater. With a final glance at the glittering city below, Lila stepped back inside, ready to embrace whatever the future held. Her story wasn't over. It was just getting started, and she intended to keep writing it one note at a time.